We'll take you to KZN in just a moment, but many of us will remember the residents of Alexandra township taking part in sometimes disruptive service delivery protests. That was back in April 2019. You might also remember the South African Human Rights Commission and the Public Protector resolved to investigate the unrest and compile a report. The Commission has now released the findings of that report. It actually took place yesterday. The report itself says the City of Johannesburg failed the residents of Alexandra. For more on their findings, let's bring in Commissioner Jonas Sibanyoni. He's with the Human Rights Commission. And Commissioner, it's great to have you with us. Thanks very much indeed. Some people may have lost the details around the story because it took place in 2019. Quite briefly, take us back to what happened and what prompted the intervention specifically of the Human Rights Commission.
Thank you for inviting me at Newzroom Afrika TV. Very briefly, what happened is that in the year 2019 or 2019, the community of Alexandra, which is called Alex, and also informal settlements at the Stretla, took to the streets. They had a campaign which they called hashtag Alexandra Total Shutdown. They were complaining about the conditions there of lack of service delivery. And that lack of service delivery, among others, entailed the fact that they were overcrowded. And then also the complaints were around the fact that there were no service delivery insofar as the provision of all the services that the City of Johannesburg have to provide to the place of Alexandra.
Yeah.
But it briefly centers around socio-economic rights as well as some maladministration, because there was the Alexandra Development Project. So people were trying to check what happened to that promise of a project to develop Alexandra.
You obviously had now undertaken to investigate exactly those issues. What happened to that project? What have you found?
Right. The South African Human Rights Commission was focusing on the socio-economic rights, in other words, those rights that are contained in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, fundamental rights or the basic human rights. And then the Public Protector was investigating around maladministration, whether or not there was maladministration. I will only focus on the side of the South African Human Rights Commission. Mm-hmm. The South African Human Rights Commission, after making an in-detailed investigation, it found that indeed there were lack of service delivery insofar as property and housing. When I talk about property, I am referring to the issue of land. In other words, the provision of land where people have to have their houses built. And also I'm talking about the fact that even the people who applied for state housing, which are called RDP, since 1990s, they are still waiting for houses to be allocated. And what we also found is that those few or those houses which were built, they were occupied by some illegal people. In other words, there was some invasion of those which were made available. And then we found that there has to be also some measures to look at the question of water, sanitation, refuse removal, as well as the right of the clean environment.
Right.
We didn't. We also focused on social welfare.
Very quickly, Commissioner, very few people will be surprised. Apologies for interrupting there. Very few people will be surprised by what you find in Alex, because these have been long-standing issues. I imagine top of mind is, What of this report becomes binding, for instance, for the City of Johannesburg to finally act against some of these socio-economic ills? Because once again, these have been ongoing problems in a place like Alexandra, and it almost feels like there's just not enough political will to get them sorted out.
Thank you for asking me that question. As the South African Human Rights Commission, we are given a mandate, powers and functions in terms of this Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, as well as the Enabling Act, which is the South African Human Rights Commission Act number 40 of 2013. What we have done, we have given some directives, and those directives are binding, that within the period of 60 days, the City of Johannesburg should come up with the measures and with identifiable plans to address all those challenges, those lack of service delivery that we have identified. I forgot just to, before we continue, to pay us words of condolences to the passing of the Honorable Mayor, Jeff Makubo, because there were some interactions or some engagements with the mayor, and then there were also some undertakings before that some actions will be taken in addressing the complaints that were lodged with the Human Rights Commission when there was the panel that was conducted by jointly the South African Human Rights Commission as well as the public protector.
Right.
May his soul rest in peace.
Absolutely. So, Commissioner, if the City of Johannesburg misses the 60-day deadline very quickly, what becomes the consequence?
Right. We've got powers to compel them, and because we've got the power to litigate. Amongst the Chapter 9 institutions, we are the only Chapter 9 institution that can take powers. Also, the public protector has those powers to subpoena. We can subpoena them and brought them to account for failure to comply with our directives. We regard our directives not merely as recommendations, but as binding. They can only be reviewed by taking us to a court of law through the judicial review.
All right, and we're watching the space quite closely. Commissioner Jonas Sibanyoni, thanks very much indeed. He's with the South African Human Rights Commission. Once again, appreciate your time.